Great. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the AMCC weekly national call held every Monday at 11:30 Eastern. Just a very quick announcement for future Monday call invites. We're going to be moving the Q3 and Q4 invites over to our Google Calendar. So tomorrow you'll receive an invitation from me, which will serve as the next 6 months of this call through the end of December. So make sure to be on the lookout for that. And if you have any colleagues who would like to be added to the call who haven't been already, please send me their emails and I'll make sure to have them included. With that, Matt, would you want to kick us off? We've got a lot of updates from our road trip last week and some conferences coming up, and then Bill Eggers as well from Deloitte is here with us.
Yeah, great, David. Thank you, and welcome everyone. Matt Bogosian, Executive Director of the American Manufacturing Communities Collaborative. As you know, some of you may be new. We have this for years. This 30-minute call has been happening every week, non-holiday weeks, to exchange best practices across the country, from public, private, nonprofit stakeholders trying to strengthen the manufacturing sector in America. We have not only this weekly call, but we have the weekly AMCC update, which goes out. And I like to highlight a few things that are in the update on this call, after which we either have a discussion about an important topic, and people want to share events and challenges and opportunities that they're seeing, or we have a presentation. And as David said, we're lucky enough to have Bill Eggers from Deloitte on with us today to talk about his book and his work really in trying to do some of the things that we're doing here, strengthening the ecosystem of support for manufacturing, with government partners, but all types. So before I turn it over to Bill, let me highlight a few things on the list. As David referred to, AMCC, we're doing a series of road shows around the country, and we were delighted to be able to do a road show trip last week into Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then on to the Manufacturing Innovation Institute, America Makes in Youngstown, and then to Matt Fieldman's great conference up in Cleveland with so many, I think over 30 manufacturing extension partnership representatives from over 30 states. It's a fabulous swing around and just reinforced the importance of what we're doing, the progress that we're making, directionally, very excited about that. And David will be, putting together his report of that trip, as he has done for all the different road shows around the country. Part of our, way that we exchange best practices across the country. So and we have more road shows coming up. Next month we're going to be in Illinois, and then Virginia, North Carolina, California, etc. So if you're from a region that wants to have a road show, we can talk more about that. Just to send David and I a note. Also in the update, of course, are a slew of opportunities, federal interventions from different federal agencies trying to strengthen the manufacturing ecosystem. Artificial intelligence is now on the radar. One of the things I wanted to highlight is Senator Schumer's release of a innovation framework for artificial intelligence. We, no doubt, you are already trying to get smart on the scope of the challenges and opportunities with AI. I'm with you. It's at least a good first step to have a framework with hopefully a lot more to come on that front. One of the, after we sent out the update, you might have received a note from Mike Gilroy from our friends in DoD and ManTech. As if you've been a part of these AMCC calls for a long time, DoD have been great partners in trying to strengthen the defense industrial base, the ecosystem of support around defense manufacturing. And Michael Britt Crane was on this call just a few months ago talking about our longstanding intent and their longstanding intent to host a convening for network of networks, recognizing that the federal agencies are siloed as our for-profit parts of the ecosystem and nonprofit parts of the ecosystem around American manufacturing. And so they've been wanting to have a convening. He came on and talked about that convening. Well, last week, they decided that the only time this year that they could really pull it off for convening would be September 12th to the 14th. So I found out about it last week too, and that conflicts. Of course, we've learned with some other parts of our network that have a convening up in Buffalo, the MEPs that week, but that's the way it is, right? You know, we're learning. DoD is committed to trying to get on a regular schedule, probably in the springtime. I communicated with Mike Gilroy of their office this morning. Also, good news there is that DoD has our friends at the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness, it appears, hired to put on that convening September 12th to the 14th. So it's progress, and if you have any questions about that convening, we're learning with you about it. We had sent ManTech some agenda items back in January, so I re-forwarded them to Mike and Ken Poole at CREC and Michael Britt Crane this morning, just to make sure your voices are heard in the development of that agenda, and then we'll go forward together. So let's see. So if you have any more questions about that, you can just send me a note or David a note, and we can proceed accordingly there. I don't want to take any more time away from our august guest here, Bill Eggers, who many of you probably know. He is at the executive director of Deloitte's Center for Government Insights, and has been a thought leader and writer on a whole slew of important parts to the American manufacturing community ecosystem, including the release of his new book, Bridgebuilders: How Government Can Transcend Boundaries to Solve Big Problems. So, Bill, you are now in this field of play, where that's going on big time with our nonprofit and private sector partners. So, thank you for being on with AMCC to talk about your learnings. And let me turn it over to you, Bill.
Great. Thank you so much. This is Matt and David. It's such an honor to be with all of you today. Just a little bit of background. So Deloitte, we've been working with Manufacturing Institute, America Makes, Council on Competitiveness, and now the National Commission on Innovation Competitiveness for literally decades now. I was looking, I think, going back to the early 2000s around these topics. And so really appreciate all the work that all of you are doing. And I know, actually, I think my colleague Joe Mariani has kind of joined your group, which we're really excited about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a new book, a new Harvard Business Press book that we just came out with a few weeks ago, and which is right up your alley. I'm just going to give a brief overview of it, and then hopefully we'll spend most of the time just in Q&A because it's such a sophisticated audience on this topic. Let me just make sure you all can see my screen. And yes, okay, great. So I'm going to start off by taking you all the way back to the mid-1900s. And this was at the beginning of the invention of the automobile, which was called a locomotive at that time. And in the UK, they passed a series of red flag acts to address the automobile introduction, which included that they had to be manned by a crew of 3. They required having someone pacing about 60 feet in front of the automobile, carrying a big red flag. And again, this is at maximum speed of these automobiles was 5 miles per hour. Now, it seems very comical when you look back at this, but in fact, it was kind of based on the notion that horses were really the main vehicle for carrying individuals, and they didn't want to disturb the horses. Now, in the end, the red flag acts were eventually repealed in the 1890s, but they ended up delaying really road transport and the widespread introduction of the automobile by decades in the UK. Now I want to take you to baseball, which interestingly was invented only about a decade before the automobile. But I want to take you to modern times. And, for decades, the way that baseball players were evaluated by scouts was based on things like size and speed and physical appearance, and did they look like a baseball player, which was kind of immortalized in Moneyball. And what it ended up resulting in was a lot of players who didn't look the part in a way were ignored by the scouts and organizations. And then, of course, Billy Beane and the Oakland A's came along with the data-driven Moneyball approach, which postulated that using a whole series of different data-driven statistical measures, they could more objectively evaluate the worth of a player. And baseball and really all sports have never been the same since. Now I want to take you to higher education. And you can all put this in the chat. What do you think the average age of a college student is? Now, when we ask that question in surveys and polls, most people think of the average age of college students as, they're mostly between 18 and 22 years old. So surveys show that people say 20 years of age. But in fact, the average age of a college student, if you include part-time students, is 26 years old. And the majority, over 60%, are over 24 years old. So why do I tell you these stories? And the reason is that they all were based on a previous mental model, and a mental model which was really obsolete. And when you have an obsolete mental model, it really blinds you to the possibilities and blinds you to how to improve the systems. And when we think about government today, in whether it's the media or lawmakers, for decades, a lot of people have had a mental model as government as a kind of vending machine, where you have a problem, you pass a law, you create an organization, you put money into it, and out pops the results. Now, the problem with that mental model, of course, is that's not at all how government operates today. It operates through a series of very complex networks involving public, private, nonprofit organizations, academic organizations, and so on, through a much more horizontal model. And we have to change our mental model of how government operates, what it does, in order to more effectively have implementation. Now, my co-author is Don Kettle, who's considered the leading public management scholar in the country. Between us, we've over 75 years working on government policy implementation. And we've written about 35 books between us. We're very, very passionate about public management. And it's the implementation part is something that when you look at a lot of the think tanks in Washington and elsewhere, they mostly focused on policy. And implementation, aside from a few organizations, has been not dealt with, not addressed in the same degree at all as policy. So, but when you think about implementation, how do you do this well? A vending machine model isn't going to get you anywhere because it's through these complex networks. So we wrote this book as a kind of a continuation of work that we've been doing for cumulative 75 years of in this sort of a network model, which government is operating in today. How can you be more effective? How do you actually achieve effective implementation? And our thesis is really that no problem that matters can be solved anymore by a single organization. Try to think of any big societal issue or even any major area of service delivery. And go ahead and throw it in the chat if you have any thoughts, but it's very difficult to find one that is solved by a single organization. Even things like fire and departments and fire prevention. When we talk to someone who's been working in a big city, firefighter for decades, he said he looked at these tall group of new buildings and he said, you know, the most important thing is the building codes, the architectural design, and so on and so forth. So it's through that sort of a network. And again, when you think about most societal problems, they extend beyond the defined boundaries that legislation and different cabinet departments and so on have laid out there, and the lines between the public and private sector have been dissolving, have been blurring. I've been writing about this for decades, as has Don, and we've just seen a continuation. So think about a problem like homelessness. Is it a housing issue? Is it a crime issue? Is it a mental health issue? Is it a jobs issue? Who's responsible for it? Is it local governments, state governments, the federal government, nonprofits, the private sector, and so on? And the answer to all those questions is yes. Or think about some of the big issues we've seen lately, whether it is the train derailment in Ohio, or a shortage of cancer drugs, or just about any major issue. We see them as these kind of flares that come up, and how do you deal with this? But really, they are all just different versions of really the same problem, which is how do you get a disparate group of organizations to collaborate together to solve a problem? And at the very center of this is what we need is more of an orchestra, symphony approach. So think about an orchestra. You have experts in violins or cellos or flutes and what have you. And if they're all playing, you could have the best experts in the world, but if they're not playing from the same sheet of music, you're not going to have a good performance. And it's the same way when you think about government and creating societal outcomes. They need to be playing from the same sheet of music. They need to be aligned. And at the very center of this sort of orchestra approach are the orchestra conductors. And in this case, what we call from government bridge builders. The bridge builders are the orchestra conductors who bring together all the different players. And we profiled dozens of bridge builders in the book, going all the way back to Claire Barton and founding the Red Cross, to James Webb, who was leading NASA when we put a man on the moon, to Michael Day, who led one of the biggest sort of evacuations in human history during 9/11, where they evacuated many more people with many more votes than you even saw in Dunkirk. And these bridge builders are so incredibly important to effective government today. they see beyond organizational boundaries, they break down silos, they forge unity from diversity, they seek mutual advantage across sectors, and align incentives to achieve shared values. And sometimes these bridge builders are in government, but sometimes they're out of government. What we found was that many of the most effective ecosystems, public-private ones, were actually sometimes the integrators of these were third-party nonprofit organizations who were really expert at working across the boundaries of the sectors. Now, we're not Pollyannish about this. We know there are a lot of challenges to doing this. You know, we've now talked to dozens of groups around this, hundreds of interviews, and certainly the siloed funding and statutes is a huge challenge. Building political support for this, accountability. We have a vertical accountability model, which is we want to find someone, things go wrong, we want to find, decide who's responsible for that and so on. But how do you have accountability when you have dozens, if not hundreds of organizations involved in achieving these outcomes? And so we need to move towards a more horizontal networked accountability model. And we haven't seen that in any sort of scale. So, and lastly, it's bridge builder burnout. This is really hard work, as all of you know. And how do we create a whole cadre of individuals to do this? Because people will move in and out of these roles because of the pressures on them and so on. Now, the book is, we have 10 chapters in the book and 10 different strategies for building these bridges across sectors and effectively implementing public policy. I don't have time to go through them today. You're going to have to read the book to find out. But within each chapter, we have at least 10, sometimes 20 different, very, very particular strategies at a granular level for how to seek mutual advantage. Or I think Joe Mariani spoke to your group on how do you grow catalytic government, which is what a lot of you are involved in. Or when we talk about data as the new language, the data is the glue that holds these networks together. How do we build these cross-sector data platforms so we can share information in real time? I want to end with looking at bridge builders again, and we profile again dozens of these in the book, but what we need is not dozens of bridge builders, not hundreds, not thousands, but really millions of bridge builders today, because this is the essential skill we need today, both in government and organizations like yours that are working with government and the private sector. We are working with a variety of groups to see, can we have a job series in the federal government, which is around partnerships? How do we build this capacity? During the Obama administration, I was part of an initiative sponsored by the White House, which was on building cross-boundary leadership, what we call tri-sector athletes. How do we encourage young people who are in business schools or public policy schools or other schools to go into this space? And how do we really ramp up the expertise we have around this area? And the book is really directly looks at all that. We're really trying to create a movement here of individuals. And so with that, I will end. And here's a little more information on Don and myself, and I'm looking forward to conversation.
Oh, that's great, Bill. Thank you so much. This reminds me of one of the terms, concepts that we use around here is systems leadership. I think I posted to the AMCC update a couple of weeks ago, the entire government of the United Kingdom, the federal government, put it out to all of their civil servants that they are all to become systems leaders. And Harvard had done, the Harvard Kennedy School had done some writing on systems leadership, and how it's not kind of like a moonlighting thing, right? That's one of the hurdles that so often systems leaders like we have on this call confront when they say, hey, we've got to work together across silos, and say, well, that's not my job. And so we're with you. How can how can we, add value as a national network. AMCC, as you know, is a national community of practice for manufacturing. What would be any words of wisdom? We have a few minutes left here for this network.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I did a book 20 years ago with the Kennedy School with Steve Goldsmith, the former mayor of Indianapolis, called Governing by Network. And so this is a continuation of a lot of that. And systems leaders is the perfect way. I mean, that's what Bridgebuilders are, of course, in understanding complex systems and what do those mean. And a lot of the work done by organizations like Santa Fe Institute, which is looking at complexity, is really important. When we look at the three major bills passed towards American competitiveness, IIJA, IRA, and Competes Act, that's over $2 trillion. But the complexity level, it's basically a real-time exercise in complexity theory to actually implement that. And that's what we hear from local folks all the time. And most of that money in these bills they're in terms of tax credits, grants, and so if they're not direct government funding. And so that the bills together, when you look at them, this investment in American competitive, demonstrate more than anything else how this is the model of government today, especially for big initiatives. And how do we build that cadre of individuals? And I think some of the things that we've already seen in manufacturing, which is providing at Clemson and other places where you're actually having industry-driven sort of training for this. Earn Maryland is a great example of industry-led upskilling that we talk about in the book, and more states are going in that direction. So finding that opportunity to really lead in these areas sometimes and bringing government along, I think, is important.
That's great. We really appreciate your thought leadership and your dedication to this topic over the decades. Just so everyone knows, when Bill and I first talked, after he learned about you all and the good hard work you've been doing over the years, he said, "Oh man, I wish I would have known this sooner. I would have put you in the book."
Yeah, absolutely.
That is you all here, because this is really, this work that we're doing here has been a decade in the making, and it's so important to have the kind of intellectual foundation well described of what this application of complex system science really is. Hiwat Gebremeni, and from our Department of Defense. DOD has this program, Bill, for defense manufacturing communities. She put a note in the chat, FYI, that's the deadline for communities to submit applications for that particular program. It's just emblematic of this bottom-up, way to address, the challenges that we have. Bill also put in the chat link to his book. Let's see. We have another minute left. Anything else for the good of the order? We keep it right at 30 minutes, Bill, just because yeah.
Well, I just appreciate all the work that you all are doing, and I'm really happy we're going to continue this collaboration with my colleague Joe Mariani, who we work very closely together on this. So thank you for all your work, and thank you for your time today.
Yeah. Thanks all. Thanks, Bill. Really appreciate it.